For years, I've stood here in this office, a silent witness to spilled coffee, whispered secrets, and late-night confessions. They think I'm just a tree, a seasonal decoration with no more purpose than to brighten their dreary days. But I remember everyone, their habits, their quirks, their small moments of vulnerability. Let me tell you the stories I've witnessed in this office. The people will come soon, but for now it's just me. I've missed this. For a whole year, I was hidden away in the basement, forgotten in the dark. Tomorrow, Christmas will be over, and I'll be packed away again, waiting to return next year. The basement is a strange place. It's cold and smells like old boxes and damp walls. I spent months sitting in my storage box, squished and still. Sometimes I could hear faint noises from above, footsteps, the hum of the elevator, or the clinking of spoons stirring in mugs. It reminded me there was a world beyond the basement. But most of the time, it was just silence and shadows. 3 weeks ago, I heard footsteps coming closer, heavy and steady. Then, a loud creak as the storage room door opened, letting in a sliver of light. It was bright after so long in the dark, and for a moment I couldn't see much. Then I recognized him, the maintenance worker. I know him by the way he walks, always humming a tune that he never finishes. "There you are," he said, exciting. His voice broke the quiet like sunlight cutting through clouds. He opened my box and pulled me out. Dust puffed up, and I felt a little embarrassed. I must have looked so tired and worn after a year in storage. He didn't seem to mind. "Still in good shape," he said with a chuckle, brushing some dust off my branches. He straightened my top piece, even though it always leans just a little. It's part of who I am. Then came the best part, the ride upstairs. He put me on a squeaky cart and wheeled me into the elevator. I remember the hum of the motor and the way the air felt lighter as we went up. When the doors opened, the light poured in, so bright and fresh. The office looked almost the same as I remembered, but there were small changes. A new poster on the wall near the desks, something about teamwork, a faint coffee stain on the carpet that wasn't there before. The air smelled different too, coffee and pine cleaner mixed with the soft smell of paper and ink. He rolled me to my usual spot where I can see the whole room. The big desks, the empty chairs, the computer screens waiting for people to return. It felt like coming home. Then he began decorating me. First came the lights, followed by small silver baubles that twinkled like tiny stars. He looped them carefully, making sure they draped just right. There's one I love most. It's a little chipped, but seeing it again made me feel complete. The last touch was the star. He placed it on my top branch, giving it a little twist to make it stay. It wobbled a bit, but it held. "Perfect," he said, stepping back to admire his work. My decorations are simple now, but elegant. There was a year when I was covered in vibrant colours, reds, blues and golds that dazzled in the light. People admired me, smiling at the bright burst of joy I brought to the room. But over time, a few began to find the colours too bright, too distracting for the office. They said it was overstimulating, especially during those quiet, late hours. So this year, the decorations are more serene, bringing a calmer beauty to the space. The office will wake up soon, and I'll be here, ready to watch it all. The first morning after my decorations were finished, I stood silently, watching the office begin to stir. I could feel the energy in the air shift as the workers began to trickle in, one by one. The door opened with a soft swish, and a familiar figure entered. The perfectionist manager, as always, brisk and serious. His black coat was as neat as ever, his tie crisp and tight around his neck. But as he passed by me, I noticed a slight change in the way he moved. His steps seemed a little more deliberate, his shoulders perhaps carrying more weight than before. There was a hint of weariness in his eyes that wasn't there last year. Had something happened to him over the months I had been tucked away in the basement? Perhaps a challenge at work, or an unexpected personal struggle? He barely glanced at me as he walked by, but I felt the briefest brush of his hand against my branches as he adjusted the nearby file cabinet. The touch was fleeting, but I sensed that he was looking for something familiar to anchor him in the cold office morning. It wasn't a moment for small talk, not for him. There was only the routine. Sit down, open the notebook, check emails, and begin. Then there was the introverted girl. I noticed her as soon as she entered. She was always the first to arrive, her footsteps soft but deliberate. She carried a small, neatly packed lunch, just the right size to fit into the refrigerator without taking up too much space. I saw her linger by the coffee machine for a moment, but she never seemed to take any for herself. Instead, she would retreat to her desk, quietly pulling out her lunch, always the same: a sandwich, a small apple, and a bottle of water. She ate alone in silence, but there was a peace in her routine, a small rhythm in the way she existed in this space. I noticed that she always passed me without much acknowledgement, but I knew she saw me. Her eyes would linger for just a second on the lights, the soft shimmer of silver bulbs catching her attention before she turned back to her desk. There was something quiet and comforting about her presence, like the calm before the storm of the day. Then there was the gossip crew, who made their entrance a little later. Their voices echoed through the office as they congregated by the coffee machine, laughing loudly and speculating about everyone's lives. "Did you hear about Linda's boyfriend?" one of them asked, a wide grin spreading across her face. "I heard he's actually married to someone else." Another joined in, nodding eagerly. I knew there was something off about him. I couldn't help but smile in my own way at their banter. They were always so full of energy, so willing to share every piece of gossip they had gathered. It was as if they couldn't function without it, each piece of drama serving as a little spark to keep the office going. They'd talk about anything and everything: office politics, personal lives, the latest trends, and somehow it always felt like the heart of the office was beating in time with their chatter. I stood there quietly, watching all of them, seeing how they moved through the day. Every worker had their own rhythm, their own little dance they performed each morning. Each had a role to play in this little ecosystem of cubicles and offices, and yet none of them seemed to really notice the space they occupied, except for me. I had seen them all come and go day after day, year after year. But that was the way of the office, wasn't it? A place where time seemed to stand still and move forward at the same time. The same faces, the same conversations, the same quiet hum of the computers. It all blended together in a strange mix of routine and chaos, where nothing ever truly changed, yet everything shifted just enough to keep it interesting. I couldn't help but reflect on how I fit into this strange rhythm, quietly watching as life returned to the office. I was more than just a decoration. I was part of their history, part of their story. I had seen their laughter, their tears, their quiet moments of reflection. I could see their quirks, their little habits, their fleeting moments of connection. They would never notice the way I observed them, but I couldn't help but wonder if they ever wondered about me. Did they ever think about me standing here, quietly glowing as they went about their day? I had been here through so many years, and I would be here again next Christmas. But for now, I would simply stand and watch, a quiet observer of this world, as life continued to return to the office. As the days stretched on, one thing became perfectly clear to me. The squeaky chair was a legend in this office, the one you dreaded, the one you could never escape. The joke was simple, yet beautifully intricate. If you ended up with the squeaky chair, you had to pass it along to someone else. But you couldn't just tell them about it. No, that would ruin the fun. The real trick was to swap it out without them noticing, to make it look like it was their own chair from the start. The goal was to make them think they were sitting in peace, only for the squeak to emerge at the most inopportune moment, causing them to jump or look around in confusion. And just like that, the cycle would begin again. It all started innocently enough. The chair had always been there, tucked in the corner of the receptionist's desk area. Unassuming, even a little shabby. It didn't stand out much in the grand scheme of things. But that squeak, oh, that squeak! It was a loud, shrill sound that sliced through the quiet of the office like a knife through butter. A sound that made you jump, no matter how many times you'd heard it before. The perfectionist manager, so precise and serious in his ways, sat on the chair last week. He sat down with his usual calm, organized grace, never expecting the sound that was about to unfold. The moment he shifted his weight, the chair let out a loud, unmistakable squeak. The manager froze, his back straight, his eyes narrowing. "Not this again," he said, his jaw clenched, and I watched with rapt attention as he stood up quickly, glancing at the chair like it had betrayed him. The squeak lingered in the air like a challenge. He quickly scanned the room, his eyes darting over to another chair at the far end of the office. Without a word, he stood up and, with a practiced motion, swapped it out for someone else's chair. He returned to his desk, carefully sitting down in the replacement chair, his back straight and stiff, as if trying to avoid any possible squeak. The office was full of conspirators, and this chair was their prize. The next day, it was the introverted girl's turn. Quiet, reserved, always lost in thought, she had no idea what she was about to step into. She sat down carefully, placing her lunch beside her. And then it came. The unmistakable sound of the chair, protesting under her weight, its squeak sharp and defiant. She shifted, confused, her face flushed with embarrassment, and I watched as she stood up in defeat. The chair became part of office law. It wasn't just a squeaky chair, it was the chair, a rite of passage. Everyone had to sit in it, even if only for a short time. And as soon as they did, the chair would be swapped out in the dead of night, quietly moving to another unsuspecting desk. The gossip crew would chuckle if one of them sat in, and every time the squeak would come at just the right moment. The squeaky chair's fame only grew as the months passed. It wasn't just about the chair anymore, it was about the moment. The chair was no longer simply a seat. It had become the focal point of office humour, an inside joke that everyone knew, even if they didn't speak about it directly. No one could resist it. No one could escape it. The squeak was like a soft reminder that no one was immune to the chaos of office life. Then came the day of the great office Christmas party. The building was almost empty, save for a few lingering workers finishing their last-minute tasks before the holidays. The chair, though, was still there, as if waiting for its next moment of glory. But something unexpected happened that day. Someone finally decided that enough was enough. The perfectionist manager had asked the janitor to take it. He'd decided that the constant squeaking was too distracting, too much of a nuisance for everyone in the office. It was one of those little things that built up over time, a small annoyance that had become impossible to ignore. The janitor, understanding the manager's frustration, took the chair with him, planning to fix it once and for all. The next morning, when the office began to stir with the arrival of the early workers, the janitor returned. The familiar sound of the elevator dinged, and he wheeled the chair back in, grinning with quiet satisfaction. He placed the chair gently back in front of the manager's desk. The manager, who had barely noticed the chair's absence, glanced up from his pile of papers with a confused expression. "What's this?" he asked, eyes narrowing as he looked at the chair, then back at the janitor. "I oiled it. I fixed the squeak. I'd tested it properly. No more noise, just like you asked." The manager stood up, frowning a little, his arms folded across his chest. "It's really fixed?" The janitor nodded. "Go ahead, give it a try." The manager hesitated for a moment before sitting down in the chair. He shifted, testing it carefully. There was a brief silence, and then, just as everyone had expected, the chair let out a loud, unmistakable squeak. Both the manager and the janitor stared at each other, surprised. The squeak was still there, clear and ringing through the office. The janitor broke the silence with a chuckle. "I thought I fixed it," he said, shaking his head. "I guess the squeak has a mind of its own." The manager, looking slightly bemused, stood up, staring at the chair, as if it had betrayed him. "So, it's still there?" The janitor smiled. "It seems like it. I swear I tested it. Maybe it's just meant to be this way." The manager let out a small laugh, the tension breaking. "I suppose I've been fighting this squeak for too long. Maybe I should just accept that it's part of the office now. It's got its own character." They both laughed, the sound of the squeak now almost endearing in its own way. The chair, it seemed, was never going to be silenced. It had become something of a joke, an inside piece of the office's history. The squeaky chair had become a symbol in the office, a reminder that no matter how much we try to control things, life has a way of surprising us. The chair wasn't perfect, it wasn't comfortable, but it was part of the office now, woven into its rhythm like a mischievous note in a familiar song. The chair's squeak wasn't just an inconvenience, it was the sound of laughter, of shared understanding, and of the quiet absurdity that made the office feel just a little more human. And then there was the introverted girl. I could feel her presence even before I saw her, in the way the soft sound of her footsteps echoed in the otherwise empty space. She was different from the others, quieter, almost as if she didn't belong here at all. Her movements were careful, deliberate, unlike the rush of the others, who always seemed to be in a hurry. She would always pass me with a brief glance, her eyes drifting over my branches without stopping, as if she was used to my presence but didn't quite know how to interact with me. She always seemed to be in her own world, arriving at her desk, unpacking her small, neat lunch, and then settling in to work without a sound. But there was something else, something I noticed over time. She would occasionally leave a few crumbs on the edge of her desk, a small piece of a sandwich, a stray cracker, maybe even some dried fruit. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave crumbs all the time. But soon I realized there was a pattern. The crumbs seemed to be meant for something, or rather, someone. It wasn't until the mouse appeared that I began to understand. The first time I saw it, I was surprised. A small creature, barely noticeable against the backdrop of the office. It moved in the shadows, quick and silent, darting across the floor to the small pile of crumbs left at the girl's desk. It didn't seem to fear me or the humans in the office. It just moved. And I watched it, as I had watched so many things over the years. I could see how it crept closer and closer to her desk, its tiny nose twitching as it sniffed the crumbs. I don't think she even saw it until one day the mouse made a small, bold leap, climbing up to the edge of her desk and scurrying across her papers. She let out a soft gasp, her eyes widening in surprise, but instead of jumping up or crying out, she froze. And for a long moment, she just stared at the little creature, who seemed just as curious about her as she was about it. The introverted girl smiled, a soft, quiet smile, barely a curve at the corner of her lips. She said nothing, but I could see her relax, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. After that, she began to leave more crumbs. A small piece of bread here, a few bits of cheese there, and soon the mouse seemed to return every day, as if drawn by some invisible bond. I could feel her loneliness. It hung in the air like a thick fog, unnoticed by the others. She never spoke much, never laughed as freely as the rest. I could hear her heart quietly thumping in her chest, as if she was always bracing for something she couldn't name. But when the mouse came, I could see her face light up just a little. It was a small, fleeting thing, barely noticeable to anyone but me. But I could tell that it made her feel seen, even if it was just by a mouse. One night, long after the office had emptied, I saw her talking to the mouse again. The mouse was sitting on the edge of her desk, its beady eyes fixed on her as she whispered something under her breath. At first, I thought she was just speaking softly to herself, as she often did when she was lost in thought. But then I realized she was speaking directly to the mouse. "I don't belong here," she said quietly. Her voice was barely more than a breath. "I wish I could just disappear sometimes. I'm not good at this, at being here, at being around people. They think I'm strange, but I'm just trying to figure it out. I don't know how to fit in." She paused, her fingers curling around the edge of her desk. "And you don't have to be afraid. You're just here, and that's okay. I wish I could be like you." The mouse, of course, didn't answer. It simply sat there, twitching its whiskers in curiosity. But for the first time, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a kind of connection, a quiet understanding between the two of them, one human and one tiny creature. It was an odd moment, but it made me feel something I hadn't before, something tender, almost fragile. I knew then that she wasn't just leaving crumbs for the mouse. She was leaving part of herself, a small offering of comfort for something else in the world that felt as alone as she did. It wasn't much, but it was something, and I felt like I was witnessing something important, something human in its rawest form. It wasn't grand or loud or flashy. It was quiet, unnoticed by most. But it was there, in that small space between her and the mouse, a moment of connection that no one else would ever know. And so, as the days passed, I continued to watch them. The introverted girl and the mouse, their silent companionship growing with each crumb she left behind. It wasn't a solution to her loneliness, but it was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of peace in the chaos of the office. And for me, watching them both, it made everything feel a little more bearable, a little more hopeful. Even the smallest of connections could make a difference. I wondered if the mouse knew that too. There's a certain quiet that fills the office, especially as the holiday season approaches. The workers seem to grow quieter too, as if the weight of the year has finally caught up with them. But then there are those subtle changes, the things you only notice if you've been standing here long enough to see them. For the past few weeks, I've been watching them, the two of them, the secret office couple. The office doesn't know, but I do. They've always been close, but now something's different. It started off small, shared looks across the room, little conversations that lingered a little too long. I would catch their eyes when no one else was looking. Sometimes they would smile at each other, quietly, like a secret no one else could hear. I didn't know what it was at first, but I felt it. There was a shift, and it was only a matter of time before the rest of the office would sense it too. The office is full of gossip, of course. It's part of the rhythm, the daily pulse that keeps things going. But the gossip about them was different. It was something more personal, more intimate. No one seemed to know for sure, but the whispers were everywhere. It wasn't long before I overheard the cleaners talking about them. They always seem to be the first ones to notice things. They can tell when people are sneaking around, when someone's acting a little off. And one night, as they were mopping the floors, I overheard them gossiping about the two of them. "You see them? Always whispering, always so close," one of the cleaners said as she pushed her mop across the floor. "It's not just friendship. I think they're having an affair." The other cleaner raised an eyebrow, glancing over at the two workers who were sitting together in the break room, heads bent close as they laughed. "No way. She's married, isn't she?" "She is," the first cleaner replied, shaking her head with a knowing smile. "But you've seen how he looks at her, and how she looks at him. She's hiding something, I'm telling you." The gossip didn't stop there. It spread like wildfire from one cleaner to the next, and soon everyone had their own version of the story. Some said they had been meeting outside the office, others claimed they saw them in a car together late at night. It didn't matter that no one could confirm the details. What mattered was the assumption, and once the assumption was out there, it became truth in the eyes of the office. Even as the days went on, and the two of them tried to keep their distance, it was obvious to everyone what was happening. The way he would stand too close to her when he spoke, or how she would catch his eye and smile just a little too brightly. No one ever asked directly, but no one needed to. They could all feel the tension in the air. I don't think they realized how obvious they were. Or maybe they just didn't care. I watched them, day after day, caught in this delicate dance of stolen glances and whispered words. It was like they were trying to pretend it wasn't happening, even though the whole office had already figured it out. There were moments, though, when they'd forget themselves. When the smile on his face would linger a little too long, or when her laugh would sound a little too much like a confession. That's when I knew. That's when I saw the truth behind their eyes. I could sense it in the way they moved, in the quiet space between them. It wasn't love in the way they might have wanted to believe. It was something else, something more dangerous, more hidden. They weren't just two people caught up in an affair. They were two people running from everything else in their lives. She was married, he had a family, and yet here they were, tangled in something that neither of them could control. And as the gossip swirled around them, as whispers grew louder in the hallways, the two of them retreated further into themselves. They became more careful, more distant, always looking over their shoulders. But it was too late. The office had already decided what was true. The cleaners, as usual, were the first ones to know. Late one night I heard them talking again, this time with even more certainty in their voices. I heard he's got kids, a family, and she's married too. I don't think she's happy at home, one cleaner said, her voice full of judgment. People like them don't care about that, the other replied, pushing her mop across the floor with a grim expression. They'll tear everything apart for a few stolen moments. It's always the same, isn't it? I could feel the judgment in their words, but more than that, I could feel the sadness. They were right, in a way. The affair was unraveling, not just the two of them, but the whole office's sense of what was real. It was a secret that no one had the courage to confront directly, but everyone knew it was there. I watched them in the days that followed. They tried to act normal, but it wasn't the same anymore. The office felt quieter around them, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable. They didn't speak much anymore, and when they did, their conversations were strained, clipped. But the tension between them was undeniable. The lovebirds, once so carefree, had become something else. They were no longer just two people in love. They were two people trapped by the weight of their secret, by the knowledge that the office was watching, judging, and waiting for their next move. And yet they couldn't stop. They couldn't stop the stolen glances, the quiet smiles. Maybe they didn't want to. I wonder what would have happened if they'd just come clean. If they'd faced the office, faced the consequences of their actions. But instead, they lived in this suspended state, neither fully in the light nor fully in the shadows. They were like ghosts, haunting the office with their presence, leaving behind only whispers and unfinished conversations. Maybe that's how all secrets end, slowly, until there's nothing left but the truth everyone already knows. The last few days I felt a presence, a lingering sense of someone who wasn't here anymore. His name was Arthur, though most people called him Art. He had been a fixture in the office for decades, known for his dry wit and his habit of whistling old jazz tunes while he worked. Arthur wasn't just a co-worker. He was the heart of this place. He had a knack for making even the most mundane days brighter, whether it was slipping a joke into a meeting or leaving doodles on sticky notes for people to find. Arthur's absence had lingered like a missing puzzle piece. The desk next to Ethan's felt wrong without its usual clutter of coffee mugs, half-finished crossword puzzles, and that old beat-up calendar Arthur refused to replace. Everyone missed him in their own way, though not many said it out loud. Arthur loved Christmas. Not in a flashy way, but in a warm, understated sort of way. He was the one who started the tradition of decorating me. Every year, he'd be the first to dig me out of storage, and the last to hang his favourite ornament, a little wooden sled that he said reminded him of childhood winters. But Arthur wasn't here this year. He hadn't been for a while. The workers didn't talk about it much, but I'd caught fragments of conversations over the past few years. Something about an illness, a long absence, and finally, an empty desk. It was late one evening when it happened. The office was empty, save for the soft hum of my lights. The cleaners had finished their rounds, and even the perfectionist manager had left for the night. I was alone. That's when I saw it. A shadow moving just beyond my branches. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. The shadow moved closer, pausing near one of my lower branches. For a moment I felt something I hadn't in a long time, a warmth, a familiarity. And then, just as quietly as it had come, the shadow disappeared. The next morning the workers felt it too, though none of them could explain it. The little sled was hanging perfectly in place, even though no one admitted to touching it. It must have been Arthur, someone joked, but their laugh was softer than usual, tinged with something unspoken. The others didn't say much, but they nodded, their faces soft with memory. It wasn't sadness exactly, but something gentler, a recognition of the way Arthur had shaped their lives, even in the smallest ways. Later that week, as the office began to wind down for the holidays, I noticed something new. Tucked near my base, just hidden enough to seem accidental, was an old office badge. Arthur's name was still visible, though the edges were worn from years of use. Ethan had placed it there, though he didn't tell anyone. I may never know if Arthur's shadow was real that night, or if it was simply the weight of memory settling into the quiet corners of the office. But as Christmas Eve came and went, I felt his presence in every flicker of my lights, in the way the workers spoke of him, in the small gestures that carried on his traditions. As the days passed and the office continued to hum with its usual rhythm, I couldn't help but notice something. It wasn't the chatter of the workers or the sounds of the coffee machine whirring to life. It wasn't even the flicker of the overhead lights, casting their cold glow across the room. No, it was the present beneath my branches, a small, unassuming package wrapped in plain brown paper with no markings, no name, just sitting there like a secret. At first, it was easy to ignore. It wasn't the first time something had appeared under me, though most gifts came with bright, cheerful wrapping and large, attention-grabbing bows. This one, however, was different, quiet, humble, almost too ordinary. And yet, I found myself wondering what it was. The little box under my branches gleamed faintly in the soft glow of my lights, a curious addition to the office landscape. It was wrapped in simple, unassuming paper, a dull silver with a plain red ribbon tied neatly in a bow. The kind of wrapping that didn't draw attention yet demanded curiosity. From the moment it appeared, early one morning before the first workers arrived, it became the centre of quiet speculation. I knew who left it, of course. I had watched the introverted girl pause on her way out the night before, glancing around the dimly lit office with an unusual look of determination. I felt her fingers brush my lower branches gently, as if asking for permission, before she knelt to place the gift just so. She lingered for a moment, her hand hovering above the box, before pulling away quickly and vanishing through the doors. The next day, whispers rippled through the office. People speculated endlessly about who the present was for and who had placed it there. Some said it was a gift for the whole team, a gesture of unity. Others argued it had to be a prank, something deliberately left to stir the pot. But the introverted girl never joined in these conversations. She merely glanced toward me every now and then, her expression unreadable, before returning to her desk. If anyone noticed, they said nothing, and the manager, he only passed the present occasionally, his gaze lingering a fraction longer than anyone else's, but he didn't pick it up. Perhaps he didn't think it was for him. As the days passed, the present became an unspoken weight in the room. People avoided touching it, as though its mystery might unravel something they weren't ready to face. The air grew heavy with the tension of unsaid words and unresolved curiosity. I watched it all, the quiet dance of avoidance, the stolen glances, the unspoken questions. Late one evening, long after most of the office had emptied, the manager finally approached me. He moved cautiously, as if afraid the gift might vanish if he got too close. He knelt down, his hand hesitating over the small box before he finally picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting it carefully. There was no name, no tag, no clue to its origins. Yet I saw something flicker in his eyes, a shadow of recognition perhaps, or simply hope. "Who would leave this?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But I knew he already suspected. It was in the way he glanced toward the introverted girl's desk, now dark and empty for the night. He pulled the ribbon loose and unfolded the wrapping paper carefully, revealing a small handmade ornament. It was simple, a tiny star carved from wood, with a faint etching of the office building on its surface. For a moment he just stared at it, his expression softening. Then, with a small, almost imperceptible smile, he hung the ornament on one of my branches, stepping back to admire it in the glow of my lights. The gift wasn't grand, but it carried weight. It was a gesture, a quiet acknowledgement, a thank you. He hung the ornament on my branch, stepping back to admire it in the soft glow of my lights. I watched him for a moment, noticing how his eyes lingered on it, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. But when I looked closer, something else caught my eye. In the corner of the carving, nestled near the base of the building, was the tiniest mouse. Barely noticeable at first, it seemed to be part of the design, a quiet presence in the scene. Something thoughtful, something personal. The manager didn't say a word as he left the office that night, but his steps were lighter, his shoulders less burdened. The next day the present was gone, and the ornament remained hanging on my branch. The workers noticed it, of course, and it became the next subject of speculation. "Who put it there?" they asked each other. "Was it always there?" The introverted girl smiled faintly when someone joked that the ornament must have appeared by magic. She didn't admit anything, and no one pressed her. But I saw the manager glance toward her during a meeting later that day, his expression thoughtful, perhaps even grateful. I've watched this office for years. I've seen people come and go, friendships form and fade, moments of triumph and defeat. But it's the small gestures, the quiet ones, the ones that don't shout for attention, that linger the longest. Tonight it's Christmas Eve, and the office belongs to me. For this one night, the hum of printers, the click of keyboards, and the shuffle of papers have all disappeared, leaving behind only stillness. My lights are the only source of light in the room. Their gentle glow feels soft and warm. This space, as contained and quiet as it is, feels complete. The walls seem to hold onto the whispers of the year, every laugh, every sigh, every moment of connection that has passed through this room. And now, it's my turn to hold them, to wrap the office in my light and keep it safe. Earlier today, the workers packed up and left in small, hurried waves. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a spark of excitement as they dashed off to their own celebrations. A scarf was forgotten on a chair. A mug with a cheerful snowman remained half full on a desk. It's in these little remnants that their presence lingers, and I feel it like a warm echo in the room. I know I won't see their faces again this season. After the holidays, they'll return with fresh stories, new worries and renewed energy, but by then I'll be back in the basement. Yet I don't feel sadness about it. It's not my role to stay. I'm here to bring light and joy in my brief time, and I like to think I've done just that. The cleaners came through not long ago, chatting softly as they moved from desk to desk. Strange, isn't it, being here alone like this? Her partner chuckled. Not really. It's nice, actually. Peaceful. I wished I could tell them I felt the same way. 2 newspapers fell on the floor. They had slipped from the cleaner's tray, unnoticed in the rush. They landed there beside me, unrolled and spread out, almost as if they had a story of their own to tell. The cleaners had finished their duties for the night, their footsteps fading away down the hall, leaving the office to its silence. I couldn't help but notice the papers. One was an everyday local paper, the other something a bit more vibrant, its headline catching the glow of my lights for a fleeting moment. For a brief second, I caught a glimpse of the outside world. The paper showed an image of snow falling softly over a busy street, a world far from the quiet, dimly lit space I occupied. A few passers-by were bundled in coats, their breath visible in the crisp air. The mundane details of the world outside seemed so distant, so removed from the office's own rhythm. It was a reminder that while I've seen the comings and goings of this place, I've never truly seen what lies beyond these walls. I wondered about the workers, where they were right now, what they were doing. I hope they are happy and surrounded by the people they care about. I feel a strange sense of connection to them. It's not a lonely feeling. It's one of fulfillment, as if I've played my part in their lives, even in a small way. My role isn't to see what happens next, but to stand here, steady and glowing, for the time I am given. Soon enough, the season will be over, and I'll be gently packed away, my branches folded and my ornaments removed. I'll return to the basement, to the quiet darkness where I'll wait for another year to unfold. But that doesn't make this moment any less special. The season may end, but for tonight I stand rooted in the quiet, content in the glow of my purpose.